Welcome to the introductory video for the Animal Law Fundamental Series. I'm Kristen Stilt. I'm a professor at Harvard Law School and faculty director of the Brooks McCormick Jr. Animal Law and Policy Program at Harvard.
And I'm Justin Marceau, a law professor at the University of Denver and the director of our Animal Law program. Kristen, I thought it would make sense today to start by saying a little bit about the goals of this series. The Brooks Institute has recognized for several years that there's a wealth of animal law thinking and new scholarship, but this information is not easily located and it's definitely not accessible in a centralized location. So the Fundamental Series, as we understand it, aims to put the equivalent of an advanced degree in animal law training on the internet, and it's all free. So the goal of this series is a relatively in-depth education on some of the core topics in animal law and policy. Obviously, you can choose to watch just as few of the lectures or as many as you want, but the goal was a rather comprehensive series. If you put it all together and watch it on your own schedule, you'll come away with lectures on the core topics of animal law from experts in the field.
And Justin, does the order in which you watch them matter, or can you just pick and choose?
So that's a great question. And I think the answer is probably yes and no. I think that for any given person, the videos are freestanding lectures with accompanying papers where you can pick it up and learn about that topic. So if you had an interest in the Animal Welfare Act, you could watch that videos in this case, and the accompanying papers and take away what you needed. On the other hand, part of what you and I are going to talk about today, and I have some questions for you about just this, is how do you think about organizing the field and mapping the field of animal law? I think that as people watch this introduction, it might help them think about the order in which they want to watch the videos based on how we think about organizing the field of animal law.
That's great. And one of the challenges or fun things to do when watching these videos would be to make your own map.
Absolutely.
In the sense of how do they fit together for you personally, each individual viewer.
Yeah, and send them along to us.
Absolutely.
I also wanted to provide a little bit of context for the videos in this series. The topics covered are far-reaching. They touch on all kinds of areas of animal law and how we protect animals. They range from really granular discussions of key statutes like the Animal Welfare Act or the Endangered Species Act, all the way to lofty discussions of ethics and theory, and then back down to things like transparency. We hope that the study of these far-reaching and ranging materials will provide people with a context that is unique among other resources in animal law, and eventually allow people to better appreciate this field in general.
The Animal Law Fundamentals videos and the papers that you mentioned bring together these great topics. And I think they do even more than that. They introduce the viewers to the key individuals with expertise who are sharing it with viewers through the making of these videos. So these speakers include both professors and practitioners and everything in between, professors who practice, practitioners who teach. And they also introduce viewers to different approaches in animal law: legal, ethical, historical, empirical. Altogether, they prepare our viewers with the background to further dive into topics of their choosing. And of course, we're going to add to the Fundamental Series over time with new topics. Through all of them, a viewer develops a sense of the scope of animal law, and very importantly, also a framework for thinking how to put all these pieces together.
People might also wonder, who is this series for? Who is the Fundamental Series for? Who's the audience? And the answer is basically everyone. Lawyers, non-lawyers, people looking to learn more about the field. It's a growing field and we want to make it accessible to more people. This is going to include undergraduate students. It's also going to include law students. It's going to include lawyers seeking to change their practice and move into animal law, maybe lawmakers and judges. And our focus in the Fundamental Series has always been US, but we do intend the fundamentals to be helpful and accessible to people all over the world.
And viewers may also be wondering, why is this series coming online now? Why this push to have fundamental videos available? Well, the time is right. And these videos and papers fill a crucial need. The field of animal law is developing rapidly, and we now see more and more legal areas that relate to and indeed are part of animal law. And the audience is growing and growing. More students go to law school to do animal law. There are more jobs in animal law. There are more practicing attorneys who want to shift to animal law. More judges are curious, open-minded, and even issuing opinions that take animal interests seriously. This is true in the US, the central focus of the fundamentals, as you mentioned, but it's also true around the world. Animal law developments are taking place from Europe to Kazakhstan, from Australia to Tanzania.
We imagine that some of the viewers of this are also going to ask, why these two? Why are we doing this now? And fair enough, but we're not the only experts in animal law or in the country. There are colleagues that we work with on all kinds of projects. But between the two of us, we think that we have a pretty unique experience and background. Kristen directs what's arguably the most high-profile animal law program in the world, and we've both been teaching animal law for many years. We've also both litigated animal law cases and been involved in essential ways in different projects, strategic planning for organizations, and amicus briefs. And we have a pretty good vantage point on the scholarly and practitioner developments in the field. Perhaps most importantly, we both also take a scholarly view of the field, which means that we're open to critique. We have a sense of history of what's been going on. And I think that we're also both experts in other areas of law, which contributes to the growth of the field. Kristen is an expert in comparative law and property law and Islamic law, and I work in fields like criminal law and constitutional law. And both of us believe that animal law is really interdisciplinary in bringing that expertise together. So we're really excited to be able to talk to you all about this fundamental series and introduce it.
Thanks, Justin. And also, as we've thought about this introductory video and looking at the scope of all the videos overall, we've really promoted a broad-ranging approach, an ecumenical approach, so that we have people doing empirical work or doctrinal work, and that there's really no one particular view represented in these videos, but rather a full range. And that's what we hope to provide viewers, a sense of the full range of what is animal law, and they can decide which ones are important to them and which ones they might want to pursue as a career.
Absolutely. I mean, what's exciting about animal law is that there are so many different facets and so many different perspectives, right?
Absolutely. And we hope to capture all of those in the video series and in this introduction today. So let's turn to the topic now that I think is on all of our minds, which is, what is animal law in the first place? So you could say it's about any law relevant to animals, but that's really far too broad. It would include laws that are intended to affect animals in a negative way, laws that make harming animals explicitly permissible. We have to be aware of these laws. But animal law is, for us, not animal use law. So to answer our own question, let's compare animal law to environmental law. That body of law is intended to protect the environment, to preserve the environment, to prevent harm. It is not neutral on the well-being of the environment or the desirability of advancing environmental issues. Likewise with animal law, we are not neutral on the need to advance the interests of animals. We see animal law as one of the tools for advancing the status of animals in society. We could say the same about human rights law, or disability rights law, or elder law, or child advocacy. They all take their topics seriously and want to improve the situations.
Yeah, thanks, Kristen. I think that's right. And I think we should also acknowledge that there are a lot of laws out there that are designed essentially to hurt animals, that are to promote human interests, and that are distinctly harmful to the animals and our efforts to protect them. The criminal code of most states expressly exempts unnecessary and harmful conduct to animals if it's accepted or customary. States have passed laws and defended these laws in courts that make transparency and whistleblowing a crime in many states. And there are laws like right to farm laws that exempt factory farms from civil liability for things like nuisance suits that apply to all other landowners in a state. So animal law is a new and an exciting and important field, but we have to be candid that there's a long way to go. Animals suffer, and sometimes the law ignores or permits that suffering. And at other times, the law even seems to codify or sanction the very suffering we're concerned about.
And you put your finger on one of the issues that is so complicated about animal law, is that we're looking to progress the law to make it better, but we also have to work on the defense too. We have to try to stop the development of laws that make it worse for animals, and both have to happen at the same time. And so in terms of the laws we're talking about statutes, regulations, case law, international agreements, international instruments. We're talking about a wide range of sources of law. And we're talking about a very wide range of animals as well, from domesticated animals, companion animals we have in our homes, wildlife, whether living in the wild or wildlife who are being farmed for their own meats, or farmed animals, animals who are kept in intensive confinement to be killed for meat and other animal products. Marine mammals, insects. We're covering the full range of the animal world and animal law. So among these various sources of law, some of the prominent ones you'll be hearing about in these videos include the Animal Welfare Act, often referred to as the AWA, the Endangered Species Act, or ESA, the National Environmental Protection Act, NEPA, the Humane Methods of Slaughter Act, and others. But beyond this generally accepted understanding of animal law, there's no single animal protection or animal rights movement or platform. The orientation and long-term goals of animal law and of many individual animal protection and advocacy groups vary greatly and continue to evolve over time. We might say that animal advocates agree that they want to reduce harm animals suffer, but the beliefs and perspectives about what kind of protection animals merit, which animals deserve it, and why diverge significantly.
That's exactly right. There's organizations and people whose emphasis is protecting animals that are companion animals, like cats and dogs, from abuse in puppy mills and in dog fighting and in animal crush videos and in hoarding, all of these types of scenarios. For these people, compassion for the animals is strong. It's an important part of their life, but it might not extend beyond the animals that they're most familiar with. And it might not even include limits on everything. They might tolerate using dogs for hunting or even for research. But there's compassion and a desire for protection for animals, just not every animal.
For another group or type of individuals with a concern for animals, the interest in protecting them would go beyond pets and other animals who live in our homes to include other species. Say, for example, wildlife, including chimpanzees, cheetahs, rhinos, lions, elephants, whales. These people may object to trophy hunting a lion, for example, or may object to keeping lions in captivity in zoos or in a circus. But they may not object to the breeding, slaughtering, consumption of billions of domestic livestock annually.
For still another group of advocates and organizations, the focus is on a wider set of animals, but it's on animal welfare. And they want to ensure that the animals that are raised or otherwise used for humans, whether it's slaughter or circuses or movies, are used in a way that they would say is humane, right? They want to permit human use of animals, but they want it to be done in a way that is more protective of the animals. They may fiercely love their family dog. They might even object to trophy hunting or indeed any kind of hunting. And they might object to egregious factory farming practices. But they don't know if the law should outlaw or prohibit the consumption of animal products altogether, or if the ethical frameworks around animal law should be focused on things like labels like cage-free or organic or free range. Eating an animal and tolerating laws that permit that could be viewed as fine as long as the amount of suffering is limited to the best as the law might permit. This is the animal welfare view.
Great. This is a really helpful system of categorization. And so we might go further and say there are those who think that protecting animals means recognizing them as distinct living creatures who are entitled to respect and protection for their own sake. Such advocates would reject the use of animals for the instrumental benefit of humans, full stop. Animals are a who, not a what, and they are not ours to use in any way.
That's right. And even among this latter category of people who would think of themselves as animal rights adherents, there's still tremendous variety. Some think that it's necessary to be vegan. Others might think there is a moral imperative to help animals in need, perhaps through rescues or through sanctuaries. And others might think that it's sufficient to enforce animal cruelty laws and to do general animal welfare regulations in support of animal rights as a path towards animal rights. There is an entire group of animal law advocates who think that animal welfare measures are a path to animal rights. We have to keep that in mind as well. But significantly, all of this calls to mind the reality that this field of animal law has developed in such diffuse and diverse ways that it can be hard to organize or map out the many ways that we think about animal law. And Kristen, how do you tend to do that for your students or for advocates you're talking to? How do you map the field of animal law at this point?
There are many ways to map the field of animal law, and trying to do so is very useful, even if we're picking one map among many. So one way I like to explain it to students is to think about what view of animals stands behind or animates the law. A useful heuristic or system of rough division might divide animal law into three categories. So the first one is when animal interests are subordinate to human interests, so a clear hierarchy. According to this view, animals are strictly viewed as human property. Humans have dominion and control. Exploitation of animals, the commodification of their bodies and body parts serves human interests. And this describes a lot of what we might call animal law today. So for example, criminal law originally protected animals when they were the property of another human, not when they were in someone's custody. The implication, of course, is that you can do whatever you want to your own property. Tort law continues to treat animals as conferring utilitarian value to humans.
Yeah, that's a great point. And there's a number of videos in this fundamental series that express this view really well, right? We have a video about the laws governing the exhibition of animals, laws that limit what can be done to animals in research, even laws about labeling. And these are all laws that have at some level an interest in protecting an animal that's there. But the law seems to take for granted or assume that the use of that animal is permitted, that it is subordinate to the human interests, right?
Yeah, that's right. So that's a kind of a category of one view, very much a hierarchy, and it's associated with property. Number two, as animal interests are intertwined with human interests. Okay, what does that mean? The idea that if we protect animals, we do so because it's beneficial to humans. In the US, for example, those advocating for the prohibition of alcohol also wanted to stop animal cruelty. They were kind of, the movements were combined back in those days. And these advocates considered both to be harmful to the human body and soul. The idea is to watch young boys harming a kitten in public, for example, under this logic, harden all of our hearts to abuse of all kinds. So you see, the protection of the kitten is actually to protect ourselves. Today, we might say that improving the conditions of animals in circumstances such as live animal markets, where live animals are traded and even butchered on the spot, is beneficial to humans because it can reduce the risk of the emergence of a zoonotic disease. And of course, COVID-19 is a zoonotic disease. It emerged from animals. So we might protect animals in live markets in order to protect humans. That's the linkage idea.
Yeah, I love that. And that's right. It's one of the most common ways that we see animals and their interests being represented as intertwined with humans in modern animal law and policy is that concept, exactly, the idea of a link, right? And so particularly when it comes to criminal law, advocates have long talked about the connection, the link between human violence and animal violence. And so you even have papers and documents and a whole series of trainings that are based around the idea that we should be pressuring prosecutors or police to look into animal crimes, because doing so might prevent human crime down the road, right? So without getting into whether that's true, it's a nice example of the way that in this category 2, definition, we have interests of animals and humans intertwined.
Yeah, this idea of the link between animal violence and human violence, that is a classic category number 2 way of thinking, to use this categorization that I think is very helpful. And then we get to the third, and as you can see, we're sort of ramping up our attention to the animal, from property to, well, they get some benefit if there's a connection to humans. And now the third category is that animal interests are equal to or roughly equal to human interests. And this is a very exciting category. And even hearing it, some viewers may say, what world is that? We don't live in that world. And that's true. It's ambitious, it's forward-looking, but it's not fantasy. And we actually do have examples of this today, from legislatures, from courts, from constitutional drafting commissions, mostly around the world, not in the US, although we do have examples here. And here we get to questions like rights, personhood, and other formulations like quasi-personhood, as Angela Fernandez talks about. And of course, we have a whole video that is just on the topic of animal rights. So a long answer to your question, Justin, but these 3 categories are a helpful heuristic, and I use it in my class. Any case you read, any law, any legal approach to animals, you can stop and think, which type is this? What belief underpins the law? But when we look at them all together, and as much as number 3 is really exciting, we have to face our current realities. So in your view, Justin, does most animal law basically enable the use of animals? That is a number 1 view, or at best, protect animals when they protect humans, a number 2 view?
Yeah, that's exactly right, Kristen. It's so rare to find laws that protect an animal for the animal's own sake and not for some human good, such as biodiversity or preventing a pandemic. And even worse, those who do seek to use animal bodies for profit, we see in law and policy that they aren't satisfied with just getting laws that permit that suffering. They go further. And as I talk about in my fundamentals video, we've seen legal efforts to shield animal harming, animal efforts to harm or exploit animals from legal scrutiny. We've seen laws that make it illegal to engage in whistleblowing in animal agriculture. And we've seen laws that carve out absurd exceptions to animal injury, things like an exemption to the animal crime of causing unnecessary suffering if it occurs during a rodeo or a similar event. It doesn't make any sense from a strictly legal perspective to say, well, it doesn't matter as long as it happened in front of a crowd of people cheering. So yes, in my view, it's quite true that most laws and legal efforts are not protecting animals for their own sake, but rather for some intertwined human interest or to recognize animals as subordinate. It's not every law. And the video that we have on animal rights with Sean and Raphael gives some pretty good examples of legislation and legal victories around the world on this topic.
Well, Justin, you've really taken a pessimistic view here, taking us from rights to a real bleak view, but you're being realistic in your assessment, in my view as well. To practice animal law, to study animal law, requires us to understand what the laws are now, what impact they have on animals, while also working at the same time towards a better world. And so let's now turn to thinking about animal law in a broader context and see what we might find there.
Great.
So moving to thinking about a broader context, can or should animal law be seen as part of a maybe broader social justice framework? After all, we've mentioned human rights and other social justice issues earlier on when we talked about understanding sort of a normative dimension to animal law. So what about that broader context? Should we think about it that way?
It's a great question. It's something I think about a lot. There are certainly overlaps between animal law and other social justice causes. Absolutely. The ecofeminists, including scholars like Lori Gruen, who did a video for this series, have taught us that understanding oppressions of marginalized persons, including workers and immigrants, is essential to understanding the oppression of animals. There's just no question, and I think that the research on that is solid. But animal law, even more than other fields, then has to be recognized as an area of study that cannot be done in a vacuum, right? We have to think about how factory farms impact the neighboring communities from an environmental justice perspective. We have to think about the racial justice implications of encouraging hunting with dogs while prosecuting vigorously dog fighting, right? What are the labor implications and the labor protections, and what do the labor laws have to say about our constant need for cheap meat? Could we defend the free speech rights of animal activists in a way that is harmonious or even uplifting of other efforts to improve, good social ends? Properly understood, I think, animal law and animal rights is a field with a strong social justice orientation. That doesn't mean we can be the sort of cutting edge of each social movement, but I think the connections are just things we can't avoid.
Does that mean, though, that we should only think about animal interests when they implicate some human interest, like workers' rights or other kinds of issues that you've identified? Or are you giving us something different than that number 2 argument we talked about before?
Right. I mean, that's exactly where this takes us, I think, naturally. But in my view, you can look for these connections without saying that they are necessarily, we're only protecting the animal interest because it has this connection to human interest. It's sort of like the protection of the animal has as an added benefit, as a independent benefit, the sort of dramatic improvement of these other areas. That's my view. And as we think about animal law and try to provide this general overview for the fundamentals, when you think about it and you look forward, what areas do you think require more study, more research, more development? What do you think is necessary or going to help us progress in this field?
There's so many, but let's bring us back to this fundamental point that humans make the laws that affect animals. And so we have to understand what motivates humans to protect or to fail to protect animals. Why do humans love dogs but eat pigs? Why do humans marvel at elephants and their natural habitats, but also tolerate their being held in zoos, even want to see them in zoos? We really have to get better knowledge of what motivates humans if we want to advance animal law, because we do still hold the cards, or at least we think we do.
Yeah, that's interesting, Kristen. Thank you. I think that the area of figuring out what it is about humans that drives them to care or not care about animals matters a lot too. Is there a body of social psychology research that has been particularly influential or helpful to you when you think about this topic or teaching it?
I'm really fascinated with the question of consumption of meat and animal products, and why do we do it, and what kind of nudges or other structural changes might change the way people think about it. So do we put the vegetarian food first in the cafeteria line, or do we try to put information about the background of the animals alongside the food? So human consumption is a really interesting empirical question that I think there's some great work being done on right now, for example.
This is great. Yeah, I've also thought a lot about Martha Nussbaum criticizes Steve Wise and the Non-Human Rights Project for what she calls the "so like us" approach. But from a social psychology perspective, that's always seemed to make a lot of sense to me. Theoretically, it might be viewed as, not the richest, how like an animal is us, how like us is a particular animal. But from a social psychology perspective, it makes a certain amount of sense to say, oh, look, this creature has some of these similar attributes and people might relate to them.
Yeah, and what those attributes are is not so obvious. So,
Right.
For example, why is everyone talking about the octopus now, right? Why has consumption of octopus now become something that is even a faux pas, right? If you're out at a restaurant with friends, for those who are eating octopuses to start with, well, my octopus teacher.
Right.
And they are, in many ways, physically as far from humans as we can imagine. And yet, something about the cognition, something about the behavior, something about the intelligence resonated with people.
Right.
And we might say the same thing about blackfish and marine mammals or orcas in particular. the more we know, does it change the way we behave? The answer is not entirely clear as a absolute yes or no. It's very much case by case, and understanding when do we move the needle, and when is there no reaction is a question that we need to think more about.
So yeah, I'm fascinated by this project of social psychology and trying to figure out what motivates humans. But I guess at one level, I also wonder, or at least some of people might wonder, is the whole project doomed, or is it kind of a failed endeavor because we can't actually know what animals want, or can we?
It's a great point. We're sitting here talking about how to motivate humans to do this or to that with regard to animals, but isn't everything we devise ultimately human-centric? That is, what we think is best for animals. Is it impossible for humans to identify accurately what animal interests and needs are? That any attempt to determine what is best will instead be what we think is best? At some level, it might be obvious. Killing an animal for food or causing an animal to suffer, maybe that's a little bit clear that that is not in the animal's interests. But we have a challenge, a real challenge, to try to recognize animals for who they are and to protect their needs as they express them. And it means learning more and more about animals in their natural environments, understanding what might their lives be like if we had not intervened and put them in a factory farm or put them in a zoo. So understanding them in their natural environments as best we can.
And beyond that easy question of they don't want to die and they probably don't want to feel pain, do we look to the law to figure out, does it give us guidance? And do you think that there's a role for giving animals a voice in the law?
I think the law has been woefully slow to recognize that even when we have a good sense that primates are social beings, that dog needs exercise, these things have only come into the Animal Welfare Act, for example, in very recent years. So in this area, I think the law is just so far behind what we already intrinsically know to be perhaps obvious, let alone the more subtle points that we're developing over time through the work of ethologists who study animals in their natural environments. So that's one view, perhaps my current view. But what do you think? What do we need to do? Or in other words, what are the biggest obstacles to improvements right now through the law?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And I think it probably is one that viewers have and not one that we're going to be able to fully answer in these videos, right? The fundamentals are going to key up big questions like this. And I certainly don't have the full answer. But I do think we have to be candid about the fact that entrenched social norms and customs treat intensively confining animals as normal and as legal. And this has a huge impact on our ability to see major change for animals. These are norms already in society. Upton Sinclair once said that it's hard to get someone to understand something when their salary depends on them not understanding. And the same thing could be said about challenging convictions that are widely shared and held among the American people. It's difficult to bring a case before a judge and argue for some protection for an animal that he or she just ate for lunch, right? I mean, their salary might not depend on it, but their very social norms, their daily practices are so entrenched. And that makes the changes to law, which, like you said, the laws are human-made. When you think about that and you think about how entrenched our customs and norms around animal exploitation are, I think that's a huge barrier to meaningful change.
And you use the word exploitation, but most people would cringe at that. Me? No, I'm not an animal exploiter, but they go to zoos, right? They go to circuses, they consume meat. Not to point a finger at anyone in particular, but these are, as you said, well-established cultural practices. When I was growing up, we went to the rodeo every year with school, for example. People have 4th of July barbecues. These are entrenched social norms.
Absolutely, and that's just it, right? I mean, it is the use of animals. It is right? Sort of loaded to say exploitation. But it's absolutely the case that we take for granted the consumption, the research, the exhibition of animals. And that makes it really difficult to have laws that conflict with that.
And so then it's no surprise when we see the laws made by humans. That's why the type 1 thinking that animals are ours to use is so prevalent in the law, because it's part and parcel of our customs, our cultural, our holidays, basically the way of life as we see it today.
Are there other barriers that you see, Kristen, other things that you think about when you're reflecting on the reason that animal law has sort of failed to keep up with the needs of animals to be protected?
Well, we talked about culture and social norms. Somewhat related, closely related perhaps, is religious practices. So, for example, the idea of dominion over animals, which has Judeo-Christian roots, has been rethought by some religious scholars and thinkers to say it's a responsibility, not pure dominion. Mm-hmm. And religion can play a very valuable role in protecting animals. In some religions, Islam, for example, there's a very, very deep notion of compassion and mercy to animals. It doesn't mean that is what we see in practice, right, in every part of the world where there are adherents to that faith. So religion can play a very positive role, and it can also play a role of supporting practices that we might look at objectively and say, that is actually harmful to animals. It's why it's so important to engage with religious arguments, because they are so powerful for so many people and can be harnessed in the interest of animals.
You think so? You think that by engaging with religion, we will see progress in the law for animals? I think we can. Yeah. I think we can. But I think if we ignore it, we are missing a huge opportunity, and it just leaves the space open for more negative interpretations to prevail, whatever the religion may be. And I include the Jains as well, some of whom reject consumption of dairy, right, and all animal products and are basically vegans. Right. But some think that dairy is acceptable because they don't deem it to be a violent act. So if Jain activists were just to step back and to let that view of dairy as permissible persist, that's missing a valuable opportunity to use their own religious tenets in support of what we may say is objectively harmful to cows, to produce milk and to be killed at the end of their milk-producing lives. Yeah. So I think we have to confront the reality that not everything is good in animal law, that there are lots of areas where we've expressed concern in this introduction, and that many of the videos touch on the limitations in these laws and these areas of law. Is there anything that you have seen that's recent, that is cause for optimism, that is something that you're feeling excited about? Mm-hmm.
Well, I think we're always holding out hope, right? That will create or something will come along and surprise us. But one thing that there's been a lot of emphasis on now going on quite a number of years is cellular agriculture, cultivated meat. The idea that you could produce meat without actually slaughtering an animal to get it. And some people think that is the answer to many of the challenges of animal law, that people are not going to reduce meat consumption or animal product consumption, and provide a substitute that's not the veggie burger, but actually molecularly the same thing. And some people think that's never going to go because consumers will be suspicious, et cetera. We do see states in the US trying to ban it. And that's always a success, a sign of potential success, right? Because someone's worried about a threat to their own industry. So that's one area that is sometimes considered animal law, more so food law, but with potential application for animal law in the sense of taking out many of the problems that we haven't been able to fix through law itself. But something much more recent that I'm really interested in is rights of nature. And it's not a new idea, and I want to be really clear about that, because the concept has strong indigenous roots really in many parts of the world. But as a matter of contemporary legal systems and activating it in contemporary law, it is relatively new in that sense. And in Ecuador, for example, where rights of nature is part of the Constitution since 2008, a court decision from a few years ago established that animals are part of nature and thus have rights through the rights of nature provision. Now, some people may say rights of nature, that sounds very vague, and what's it going to do? And isn't that problematic? And are animals considered part of nature or only wild animals? But the reality is we really see rights of nature being taken quite seriously and becoming part of the legal system, not only in Latin America, but also in Oceania, in Europe, really in many parts of the world, including in the United States. We see it more so in federal Indian legislation, in Canada, in the First Nations. So it's very interesting, and it has a lot of potential impact for animal law.
That's great. That's exciting. Thank you. Well, thanks for doing this, Kristen.
And thanks to you too.
Yeah, and we hope that we have piqued the interest of the viewers in watching some more of these fundamentals series in animal law videos, and potentially moving on and reading the papers that accompany them as well.
Yes, we should definitely highlight the fact that each video has an in-depth paper for those who want to dig in further and look at those voluminous footnotes for a lot of great other resources. And actually, speaking of other resources, we really should mention that the Brooks Institute, the sponsor and producer of these video series, actually has many other resources available for the novice to the experienced. So the U.S. Animal Law Digest, a weekly update of what's happening in the U.S., the Canadian Animal Law Digest, an update of what's happening in Canada. Soon there'll be a research guide for animal law, which will be great for everyone from students to experienced practitioners. There'll be a digest of scholarly literature on animal law, which is something that I know we're really concerned about because we need to know what is coming out in terms of the latest studies, the latest research. In the more mid-range future, a case book, a course book on animal law that, of course, we're working on along with our colleague Angela Fernandez in Toronto. So there's many, many resources coming up, and we could spend much more time talking about all of them. So perhaps to wrap up here, we'll end with a quote from Judge Wilson. So this is from the Happy the Elephant case, which many of you are familiar with, and Sean and Raphael's rights video will say more. But Judge Wilson said, "We should recognize Happy's right to petition for her liberty, not just because she is a wild animal who is not meant to be caged and displayed, but because the rights we confer on others define who we are as a society." We very much hope that this introduction, and indeed the entire Fundamental series, provides you with understanding, compassion, and indeed enthusiasm and excitement about the field of animal law and the animals whose lives are at the center of it. For the Animal Law Fundamentals, I'm Kristen Stilt.
And I'm Justin Marceau.